So our next panel would deal with diversification of funding as a necessary action to make viable financing of the objectives of sustainable development in Brazil. The objective is to discuss how to increase the resources available to implement the 2030 agenda in Brazil and to promote sustainable finance to reach these both. And the central of the, and in terms of the national system for development and to increase the impact of the SNF in this agenda. For this debate, we will receive now the Secretary for International Affairs of the Ministry of Planning and Budget, Mrs. Renata Amaral. We'd like to invite the Vice President of the Private Sector of CAFI, Mr. Jorge Arbache. The President of the Desenvolve SP, Mr. Ricardo de Oliveira Brito. The Superintendent of the BRDE, Mr. Paulo Starke. And in the comments will be done by the Senior Financial Specialist from the AFD, Mr. Alejandro Barreneche. And we are ready for one more conversation. Just to remember, we have an official hashtag from our event, and you can put it in your post. Hashtag Forum of Development, so we can see your posting. Now ready, Mr. Alejandro. Good afternoon. Everyone tired of 2 days of a lot of knowledge, I imagine? Good afternoon to all. Those present in the public, people who are watching us in digital platforms, and the panelists, thank you for your availability. It's a privilege to participate in a forum for the 2030 agenda, and I'd like to congratulate the ABD for the success of the event and for allowing the institutional dialogue, which is one of the most important points of the meeting. Before handing over to the speakers and to go into depth of the challenging of the financing, I'd like to make a quick introduction on the central actors that contribute to this symphonic orchestra of the movement in Brazil, and starting by remembering of the great challenge that the financing gap of the 1.5 to 2.5% of the GDP, which is $4.5 trillion, the challenges to the developing countries are proportionally bigger. As regards Brazil, since '89, the constitutional funds have an indispensable role contributing with the financing of foment projects in the northeast, and thanks to the state banks' roles like BNDES, PASA, Bank of Northeast, and Banco do Brasil to complete this melody of the form of development, and these regional banks, state banks, finance cooperatives, and other public institutions like Development Agency can democratize the music and help that it gets to the ears of all. And in 2020-22, the National System for Development directed 52 billion to the SDGs, and in parallel, the federal government does the complex task of coordination of the credit operations in public entities as a guarantee of the union. The centralized role of the financing of ministries We have a process of prioritization with rigorous criteria and with a defined direction. Since 2007, to collaborate in this orchestra, those sustainable green titles, and with new agreements, and supporting with an innovative role the insertion of getting funds from new roles, and in the ecosystem of development are the research centers.
Technical dialogue keys. We have international development banks, bilateral banks, multilateral banks, and all of the initiatives and programs such as PRONAF, the Amazon Fund, with more climate, with a more climate scope, and they aim to reduce risks and expand inclusion. And so the UN has a more centralizing role, and it's a supranational role. But to diminish the funding cap, pardon me, to increase the funding to overcome this gap, okay, we need to include the private sector. The private sector is only sometimes aiming to have profit, but they have been moved by the SDGs. And I would like to highlight the role of the harmonization of all of the efforts. So the success of the entire orchestra doesn't depend on the individual talents. It depends on joint work, and also of an efficient coordination that is going to consider all of the knowledge available, information available, and so that they can follow the north so that we can have a sustainable future. We have different stakeholders from the funding for the SDGs, and this is going to be a specific scope, and they are going to help us overcome this challenge. So first, I would like to pass the floor to the International Affairs Secretary from the Ministry of Planning and Budget, Ms. Renata Amaral, and I would like to understand the centralizing role, the messages of the public policy, so that we can coordinate all of the initiatives of this funding in Brazil. Thank you. Thank you very much. First of all, thank you. Good afternoon to all. It's a great pleasure to be here with all of you, with Jorge, my friend. Jorge has already had my post here at the ministry, and we have been exchanging ideas since January when I took over this job. Good afternoon to all of us who are watching us here live and online. I apologize. I was unable to come here yesterday. This week is very complicated for us. We handed a pluri-annual plan, okay, yesterday. And so we are having a very intense week. And like all the other secretariats, we have been working together. And there was a clear request from Minister Simone Tebet. Everybody's involved all the time and everything. And I'm going to start discussing the pluri-annual plan. We handed to the presidency of the Republic yesterday to Mr. Rodrigo Pacheco, and it was a very moving work. We traveled to the 27 capitals in Brazil. That was the first time that somebody did that. It was the most participative pluriannual plan of the country. In all of the plenary sessions, we had representatives from the civil society presenting their demands, representing different groups in our society. And this was important for us, not only for us to build a more inclusive pluriannual plan, but it was a reality shock. We left Brasilia, we went to the countryside of Brazil, to the capitals, and we were able to see how diverse Brazil is, and we were able to listen to the entire population. We traveled for 60 days. We traveled all over the country, jointly with the General Secretariat of the Presidency. So we delivered this plan yesterday. Everything is online. All of the ministries took part in this journey. and all of the society, all of the Brazilian society could participate. We had over 4 million participations on the PPA website, okay? And we had many proposals. And on our website, you can analyze our methodology, everything that was done. Why am I sharing this with you? Because the backdrop of everything that we did was based on the SDGs, and that was a first as well. We got the guidance from the minister, and Ms. Lemos is the National Planning Secretary, and we had the SDGs, and the 2030 agenda had to be the backdrop of everything that we are doing for foreign investment, for creating the budget, for the pluri-annual plan. And when we received the demands from our society, from all of the ministries, it was always very clear with the SDGs beside us to see how the national priorities, they were in sync with the Brazilian strategies and objectives, and how much we can work to implement these goals. So our PPA has 5 cross-sectional agendas. Everybody has to respect, pay attention, regardless of the ministry, the secretariat. They have to respect women, Afro-Brazilian descendants, indigenous people, children. So this was a priority number 1. Climate changes, the problem that everybody discussed this. Congratulations to Minister Marina Silva. She was a great lobbyist of her topic. And so this was very important for the 2024-2027 pluri-annual plan. And then we have the long-term plan that is going to be delivered by December. We're going to deliver the 2040 plan, and also having the SDGs as the backdrop. And why for my secretariat is this important? Because having the pluri-annual plan in hands, and so we have the COFIEX, everybody knows that, okay? When Jorge was working at the Secretariat, they created some criteria based on resolution number 17 to earmark some of the resources for some projects, and now we are improving. Based on the PPA goals, all of the targets that we defined for the budget, okay? Many things were delivered in the first semester. And so we are also handing everything to the National Congress. We have the green agenda, the female agenda, the women agenda. And so everything is very clear for this budget. This is going to appear on the 2024 budget. We're going to have a separated budget, and with all of the earmarks regarding gender and the green economy. And we wanted to understand what we want to foster in terms of projects with international funding, using multilateral banks, bilateral banks. And since January, Mr. Jorge was a great speaker, José Guilherme, they were great partners trying to help me understand what was difficult for them. How can we improve? Because we had all of those people at the ministry that had ceased to exist in the previous administration. We had to rebuild the ministry, and we took advantage of this reconstruction to see what we could do best. And one of the phases that we decided to do with FIEX is to give it more transparency. There was no predictability of the meetings, and so we set 4 meetings a year. You're going to have access to all of the dates of these meetings. The agendas are being disseminated and spread out before the meeting. The results of the meetings, they are also published. The outputs of the meetings are also going to be published. And the banks started giving us feedbacks. The World Bank, the CAF, the IDB, the AFD, they sent important feedbacks to us what they missed in our system in order for our system to work better. And this was a huge learning curve for us. It was difficult to exchange knowledge and ideas, mainly in the first semester, but we have collected many fruit from this work. We got everything that we had to do, our obligations to upload this onto the transparency website. If you want to access funding, what can you do? And now we are moving on to the strategic phase. We're going to launch this next year. The idea is not to digitize the existing bureaucracy, it's to redesign the process. The National Treasury Department has been a great partner. We are including everybody in our conversations so that we can really become efficient for us and for those who are analyzing this from outside. The systems that we have are not good. We have had mayors going to our room to use our computer because they couldn't access the system. Any and all kinds of histories and stories happened in the past 6 months. So the idea is for us to have a website, to have a completely dedicated team just for the website. We have earmarked money from the budget to do that because the minister thought this would be important. And then we have the improvements, everything connected to SDG 5, which has to do with gender. And so at the end of September, we have a partnership that we created with the World Bank to train women to receive foreign investments. We're going to train mayors, governors, secretaries, because we noticed that most of the projects come from men. And without questioning these numbers, we decided that we needed to pay attention to our women. Why do we only have a few women presenting projects, becoming managers of these international funded projects? So the first capacity building is going to be aimed at women. We are talking to ENAP so that everybody can have access to this capacity building. Why? Because the more consultation letters we get, better projects we're going to create. And so the more we participate together and we share the knowledge that we want to have in these letters, it's going to be better for everybody. And then we are going to have some resolution changes at the beginning of next year. And so this year we decided to use the rules as they were, using the predictability of the system, so that we're going to have an entire year running with the old rules. And then from now on, we're going to analyze all of these rules and regulations. We're going to do a strategic planning of COFIEX, and we're going to foster projects, develop projects that are mainly focused on the 2030 agenda. That's it. Madam Secretary, thank you very much. And in fact, as a financial institution, thank you so much for your efforts, your consideration, and the inclusive participation that since the very beginning you promoted. We believe that it was a very important change for Brazil as a huge country that it is. And so we need to disseminate our knowledge to all of the municipalities and states and agencies. And so this new tool helps a lot, mainly with the inclusion of the criteria, the strictness that you have to disseminate the knowledge about how important the SDGs are when preparing a project. This helps a lot when it comes to the concentration on the axes that were mentioned yesterday, axis 2, 8, 9. And so this is a necessary step so that we can consider the other SDGs that sometimes are forgotten in the projects proposed. Now, enjoying the diversity of the panelists, we have the Vice President of the Private Sector at the CAF, Mr. Jorge Arbache. And all of the rich experience that you have in the private sector, Mr. Arbache, could you please share with us the experience of engaging the private sector towards funding sustainability projects? Well, first of all, thank you for the question. Good afternoon to my fellow panelists. Good afternoon to everybody in the audience. Thank you, ABDE, for the invitation. If you allow me, first of all, I would like to make two remarks. The first remark has to do with the COFIEX that Secretary Renata was mentioning just now. Now, knowing the systems as a whole, the systems in the region, there's no doubt in my mind that even if some people criticize COFIEX, even though some people criticize COFIEX, it is the most transparent organization, and it is very transparent and very organized, and it has the best governance, and we have to mention this. The second remark is related to the sustainability, funding, development, how can we focus on the SDGs, etc. If we take a step backwards, what happened in this debate? In the mid-1960s up until the 1990s, the mindset, everything that guided the architecture of this discussion at a global level, which was led by the World Bank mainly, was the focus. There were other topics, but the main focus was infrastructure. Infrastructure. That's what they analyzed and focused on. But time went by. And then at the end of the 1990s, the beginning of the year 2000s, and then it changed to eradicating poverty. And after a few years, we had the SDG agenda, also the gender agenda. And this topic dominated the scenario for about 20 years. At the end of the 2010s, 2017, 2018, approximately, when it became very clear that the climate change was more than urgent, as we all know, this new agenda started running over the previous agendas. Each new agenda would run over the previous agenda to a certain extent. And the climate change agenda has been running over everything. And to a certain extent, this has been changing the discussion about the SDGs. The SDGs are the great problem. But when we analyze this debate, climate change, the SDGs, sustainable development, what we see more and more, not for all of the countries, but for many countries, and I believe that we include all of them in Latin America, most of the countries in Latin America, is because this region combines the SDGs with the climate change agenda, and this is a privilege, because this continent has almost all of the conditions to make climate change to become a giant business agenda. And what kind of business? Business to help the world in its decarbonization. That is the huge business agenda. Why? Because we have to carry out a huge transformation, not only a decarbonization, but we have to change our production matrix, because most of it is gray, and now we have to change it to a green one, and this is going to require trillions and trillions of dollars, okay? And why is this region doing well, like no other region in the world? Because it's the only region that is so advanced, because we have three essential elements. It has a huge amount of water, okay, drinkable water, sweet water. We have most of the essential minerals to carry out this transition, and it also has a green energy matrix like no other region on the planet. And above all that, this region also has the main biomes in the world, the largest forest, the largest biodiversity. We have a young population, and this encompasses all of the conditions to transform the climate change agenda into a business agenda. And why is this important? Because in order for you to eradicate poverty, inequalities, and You have to prioritize this because you have two pathways ahead. The other pathway is no. Let's make the cake grow. One day it's going to impact the others, or you do the two things. And this is exactly what this agenda has. So let me give you an example. And now talking about Brazil. The region that has the most conditions to benefit itself from this greening effect of its production is the northeast of Brazil. Why? Because of the natural conditions of the northeast. They have the capacity to produce green energy at really competitive prices, not only for Brazil, for the world. There is no intermittence in its production and because of other factors. And so, since we are discussing a business agenda, and we have long production chains, we're talking about a capacity of generating solutions that can be scaled up. And more important than that, when we think about solutions like these, we're thinking about solutions that are urban.
Because we're talking about production, industrial production in its various dimensions, besides the services that are part of this production chain. Why is this also important? We're talking about the region in the planet that is more urban, and therefore the majority of our SDG problems are urban: poverty, inequality, violence, gender, violence, low productivity. If you really want to take seriously the SDG agendas, you have to go through the cities and everything that includes reduction of inequality, poverty, informality, increase of productivity. This has to be an urban agenda with these characteristics in production in large scale through businesses that are of interest of everyone, with high results, high impacts for that territory that receives those investments, good for those who send their industrial plants to the northeast, or La Guajira in Colombia, or Antofagasta in Chile, wherever. Why? Because many of these industries, they have a lot of competitive and security of energy. So this is an agenda clearly win-win-win. But it combines impacts on the environment with high results. SDGs are impacted, and benefits to the consumers, since we're talking about accelerating the process of green things. So what is CAF doing finally? I'll speak quickly. Understanding all of that, we believe that's the path this discussion is going, and this region, yes, can combine the SDG agenda with the green agenda. Yeah, we have supported in the private sector. This is the great agenda and anchor of our businesses. And it's what we're doing in the case of Brazil, not on many operations, so also with the BND. And we've helped to disseminate this agenda in various directions to take all of this, and not only through the agenda mobilization, and we're talking about agenda that requires many billions of dollars. And not all the banks have a partnership, significant partnership, and it's the path of the mobilization. How can we use the adequate instruments for that in emitting bonuses and things like that? Okay. And stopping here, we could talk about other things that we're talking. This is the cherry on top. CAF elected as a priority to do the development banks of the regions and the banks of Brazil as our preferential partner, and the main of the vice presidents is the development banks. And I would say that many of you that are clients of ours with a lot of pride, I think it's impossible to think of a better allied, more adequate, with a vision that is more convergent and with a greater capacity of results and realizations than you, that you are development banks. So I thought it was very interesting the context that you have in sharing with us. There are many elements to understand the reality of the agenda, and this analysis that you did on the marriage between the public and private sector, and this natural interest of the private sector of having productivity and those solutions that are being proposed in Brazil for the transition of the paradigm. Does it have profit? Is it profitable in our country? And to get to the continuity of the humanity. And we see themes that are being developed, like green hydrogen and aerial wind power, sun power as well, a lot of regulation that is appropriate for the stability, and to open an agenda very big for the private sector, and solar panels as well, and this potential of the sun that we never forget in Brazil. So it's very interesting, this marriage between the private sector that is distant from the reality of sustainability, but integrates to the realities of fomenting development. And I will give the word now to Mr. Ricardo Dias, which is the Desenvolve São Paulo, in the experience of a development agency, Mr. Ricardo, and is the tool of public policies of the state. Do you have an opportunity of having capillarity and getting to know the benefits and go a little bit further from the center of a capital and distant from the reality? What is your experience? What projects, innovative projects do you have that help or contribute to spread in the different axes and these objectives of sustainable development? Thank you, Alejandro. Thank you, the BRDE, for this invitation. I'm very happy to be in this very qualified panel. And thanks all the BRDE team. Very good sessions, very productive for all of us. I'll get to the answer in your questions in a few minutes. But let me tell you of a mental trip when I saw the title of this. And I went back in our history. When you go in the post-war, why did they create the World Bank, the BNDES, and all this network? It was basically something similar to the SDGs, but in the practice it was that. There was lack of infrastructure, poverty was a problem, agriculture was another problem, and the market and the credit market had very serious problems. The private would look to the financial return in a myopic way. He couldn't appropriate from the social return of that project. And we, as a network for development, it made sense, and we continue to make sense. So nowadays, we deal with the SDGs. There are resources from the multilateral, from CAFI, IDB, KfW. We have resources from the multilaterals, and we deal with the SDGs, but the private is ESG. It's a citizen company. So how do we bring the private to the company to invest these trillions, which Jorge mentioned? So the point nowadays is that we can try to have more impact using the private. And going to the first point of Alejandro, There is a tremendous difficulty. We don't have capillarity. We don't have a bank with a series of branches where I have an account from a small company. I know he has a house in the beach, how he spends his resources. So it's very pretentious us to think that we will have this sensibility at the edge. So what is the suggestion here? I think Jorge talked about this. You also, we should be thinking in how we can use more and more guarantee funds to do work. The private doesn't want to take the risk because guarantee in Brazil is a problem. So maybe we should set up a guarantee fund that guarantees the private to contract, maybe a cooperative that has a capillarity and knows the front. How are we seeing this in the Desenvolve SP? And I'll give a concrete example of a project that will be on the streets in that way. We have a partnership with GIZ, and with the GIZ, it's a, sorry to do an advertisement, it's a ad that could contribute. So GIZ, together with us, we want to make a prong they called potentialize. It's about the SDG. We want to increase energy efficiency of the industry. So the industry that has a factory where the machines are great consumers of energy could contract a credit in the Desenvolve in order to exchange this machine for one that is more efficient, using the guarantee and this guarantee fund that we would create for this specific reason. So how do we potentialize this? We would like that the private banks also were able to contract using this fund. And so the idea, and something, it's a step we still have to go because it depends on a decree. And we would have this fund. Desenvolve could maybe contract, but the private as well. So the cooperative, the bank, who knows the businessman at the end, would put on and would put in this project. I have 100. I can generate credit. I can put 100 in a guarantee fund that will leverage 10 times, and I can get 1,000 in credit. And we want to diversify our portfolio for other points that we notice that are in what would be the SDGs. The center of São Paulo is decadent. Everyone in the media can see it. The commerce is having great difficulty because you cannot get credit. Oops. So let's create a guaranteeing fund for the center of São Paulo. Once more, if this fund is open to the private resources can go in and we can potentialize the impact of our resources. So I'll leave for the questions later on, but basically this title made me go back in time and to think that when the SDGs were not systematized, we were born to deal with SDGs and the private didn't want, and now the private want to participate, and we are now here to try to help them bring them into the game. Thank you, Ricardo. I think your intervention has a lot of interesting things, but I'd like to highlight two. On one side is the support of a development partner that has a contribution with technical assistance and it's something like Desenvolve São Paulo to have the creativity and adaptation in the challenges of amplifying the fund and the sources of financing. It's important to increase the actors that participate, that you can create a fund that can deal for a specific period. This is one of the steps to reach even more beneficiaries and to go further from the centers of the credit offer. Now I'd like to make a bridge with the contribution of Paulo Starke, which is the superintendent of the BRDE, and it's a development bank from the extreme south, and he's been there since 2008 and has an interesting case, not only of offering of financing, but also the diversification of the sources of finance. How do I execute these funds? And I hand the floor to Paulo Starke. It's not a multilateral, but a regional development bank in Brazil. Thank you, Paulo. Good afternoon to all. First, a disclaimer. I am superintendent of the BRD of the Paraná branch. It acts in the three states of the south, and it's owned by the three states. But I will talk about and focus more in Paraná. I'm a manager at the strategic level, and I'm going to talk more about at the front end where people are applying resources and looking at the strategies of the BRDE and of this case of the bank in terms of diversification and the role of the SDGs and the mandate of the bank. I am also coordinator of the Commission of Operations of the BRD, and in that condition I will speak a little bit about the pain of the subnationals, the difficulty of diversification, of being able to get sources. I will point at the end a possible path, or at least try to. Firstly, it's been a development bank for 60 years, from the 2000 on. 2000 was the last year that the BRDE had another source that not from the BNDES in the 23-year history. I'm going to talk. The last operations were Recope, directly from Bacen, the Central Bank of Brazil. We operated the Ministry of Tourism, FINEP, and we spent 10, 12 years specifically only putting forth BNDES. The BRDE is a bank that only does the passing forth. And it's a bank that on lending, and it's a transfer bank, if you could say. We only transferred from the BNDES and some resources from the bank itself. And in 2010, we registered for the Rio Grande do Sul, the first operations in 2011, but still very little expressive. In 2012, we started to transfer FINEP. It wasn't doing this in the beginning. In 2013, at the end of 2013, we did the first operation for the FGTS, which is like the Social Security of Brazil, but still very timid. But the truth is that BRD wanted to do its mandate. It's the biggest subnational bank of Brazil that is not federal. And the BRD wanted to continue growing and took on very much the growth of the BNDES growth from 2008 to 2015. When it grew a lot, the BRD grew as well. But we took a fright in 2012 when the BNDES had reached at their limit that we could operate with them. We got a little bit shaken, and we were also aware of the diversification, but still very timid. And the BRD starts to discuss how it will amplify, or better, reduce the dependence they had on BNDES. On the other hand, always remembering we have our mandate as a development bank. It was always a sustainable development, but we had an agenda, the 2030 agenda, and the BRDE in 2015. Our directorship had a very big clarity in how to conduct the business, and 2015 and reduced. It's already in financial crisis, and the BRD noticed that. And so what did the BRD do? It launched a program which called BRD PCS that has the same name of SDG 12, which is Sustainable Production and Consumption. We launched this program. To shorten the story, this program was recognized even in the UN Assembly the same year. We had our first KWD operation, and with the European Bank of Investment, we launched this program with a clear objective that move to what we define now a green bank. We self-define as a green bank. We wanted to make it clear to all that our mandate was to finance the consumption and sustainable production.
And thanks to this program, we received our first international contract. So the AFD, we have 3 contracts with the French Development Agency, and we're waiting for the 4th one. My 3rd contract is already over, okay? I have already allocated the funds. And so our main objective was to fund the BRDE PCS scope. And so, based on the same program, there was a program, but it had a little more limited scope. It was aimed at generating renewable energy, but it was signed in the same year jointly with the FED. And I wanted to highlight that this operation happened with the approval of the European Union via COFIEX, okay? And I'm going to discuss this. And this operation received the approval of the European Union without counter collaterals, okay? And up until now, it is the cheapest operation that we have. Among the 6 international partners that we have, including the 8 contracts we have signed, this is the cheapest operation. So if we want to continue diversifying our sources to fund SDGs, we have to discuss their costs. And so we continued working, and now in 2023, we have 6 contracts signed with international partners. In 2012, we had the BNDES as basically the only source of our liabilities. We had the FCO, 7.6 billion was our debt with the BNDES, and only the BNDES was our creditor. In 2022, we signed with 11 different creditors. We have the BNDES, Fungitur, FINEP, the Bank of Brazil, Caixa Econômica Federal, the AFD, the CAF. We started operating with CAF in 2019. I believe I have already mentioned Funcafé and others. And now in July, I believe today, we asked for the first operation in Paraná of the IDB to happen today, on this date. So the granting of this fund, but on the 30th of September, I believe we're going to sign with other 2 international sources, the IDB, and we also have funds coming from the IDB, and soon we're going to work with the World Bank. So we're going to have 14 different international sources. So between 2012 and 2022, we went from one supplier to 15 different sources of resources. One essential point, I mentioned our growth. So the BRDE, in 2012, our portfolio had only 7.5 billion. In 2017, we arrived at 13.5 billion in our portfolio. 13.5. We remained at that level for quite some time because of the crisis. Up until 2022, we closed everything, all of our operations with 15.5 billion. We had a growth. That is our active portfolio. We're not talking about liabilities. And Selic is also helping us to grow our cash flow. But 15.5 billion, 13.5 billion. So we have 5 years between these two numbers. 1.3 billion come from international sources. It's important to mention that. So the bank is trying to get international funds to fund the SDGs. And so this is concrete data to show to you that we have been doing things right. And so we have exchange exposure, the international sources, they represent 10% of our portfolio. There are risks related to all of this, but I believe we're doing good work at the bank. I believe that I have mentioned everything I wanted. The bank's history, our diversification. I believe my 10 minutes are almost up. I'm going to mention 3 points that are important to contribute to this debate. In these past 10 years, what do I think is important to mention? Among the 6 operations, 3, they have been approved by the federal government. And so the FDB, CAF, and they have been approved by the federal government. And some, so the other one has been approved by the European Commission. And so 3 months to be approved without counter collaterals. And the IDB, we're now going to start handing out the emergency IDB fund. It was reconfigured in 2021. It was $50 million so that we can fund. I'm going to cash flow to companies that had many losses because of the pandemic, and we're going to start handing out these funds only in 2023. What happened? The approval by the federal government took a while. The whole process took about 2 years. I'm not saying that the process stayed at COFIEX for these 2 years, but the approval process in Brazil is very complicated, and the European Commission approves everything within 2 months with the lowest interest rate, and with our federal government, the process was way longer. And now we need for our project to benefit small companies that were impacted by the pandemic. It's taking a long time. So we want this process to become faster. So we need to do things in an excellent way, not just do them anyway. Even though we have international development organizations here praising the work that is done by COFIEX, but we need to improve this process. And I believe that another contribution that I can give you is the decentralization of resources. Brazil went through a moment in which everything went through the BNDES. As I mentioned, we went through changes, and in the beginning of the 2010s, the Bank of Brazil started recognizing the lenders, and then the FGTS lenders. And so we started the decentralization process of the BNDES, Funcafé, Fungetur. We also have other sources appearing, but our decentralization process is still very shy. We need to make the money find the states and the municipalities. And we can reach an audience that the federal banks cannot reach. at least the BNDES. This is my second contribution. We have to continue with this decentralization process in a fast way because we need the other sources to grow. Why? Because the BNDES, even though it is an efficient source of funds, it limits the financial agents that are there. And finally, the last contribution that I want to give you, and I didn't mention this, I talked about the SDGs, the green banks, and the BRDE. In the PCS program, we have been trying to achieve the SDGs. And what are the SDGs that we most contribute for? By far is SDG 2 regarding food security. Differently from the other SDGs, we contribute with the SDG 12, SDG 13, SDG 7 as well. Our international funds, they basically operate with a sustainable consumption. This is important, but we reached a lot of renewable energies in this sector. They try to find renewable energies, and we are not paying too much attention to food security, SDG number 2. And so I only can invest in silos and storage structures, storage infrastructure. So we don't want to reach renewable energies. We do not want to just achieve a reduction of the climate changes. But the BRDE wants to contribute to the other SDGs. And I believe that this is what we had to say. Thank you, Paulo. So we're going to have to wrap up in a few minutes, but I would like to enjoy this opportunity to ask a question to the panelists. It's going to be an open question. Maybe all of you could contribute. We don't have a crystal ball to find out about the future, how we're going to fund the 2030 agenda. But if you could have theories, hypotheses, what would be innovative tools and instruments, and how could we offer blended financing? How can we facilitate the access to these funds? What would be your main bet today? Wow, how much pressure. Everybody's looking at me. I'm going to answer. Regarding the COFIEX, I was thinking about looking at Jorge. Should I tell him this or should I tell you this? Since I arrived at the ministry in January, I believe that the complaint champion was the time the process takes. When we can wrap up the process in 1 year, it's amazing. It's very complicated. We are redesigning the process regarding the National Treasury Department, COFIEX, my secretariat, and then it goes to the Chief of Staff's office, it goes to the Senate, and then we lose the control, and we're talking with them. So we're trying to align everybody, put them on the website, and this is a complaint. It's a top complaint. And the second one is lack of transparency. Even though we were discussing that, yes, in our region, the Brazilian process to approve international funds is well advanced. It's way more transparent than the average. But yes, it takes a long time. And I was really shocked when I arrived at the secretariat. To answer the moderator's question, it's difficult to have a crystal ball, but something that I can see that is happening a lot, and we include the National Development System, is the coordination among the multilateral banks. So we had a signature in Belém of a green coalition. It was led by the IDB and the BNDES, but it involves 19 other banks, regional banks, national banks. And this is an example of an initiative that is positive, and it brings everybody to the negotiation table, and everybody's trying to find common solutions for the problems that we face. And most of them are related to the 2030 agenda, to the SDGs. So I believe that this sharing of experiences among the banks, local banks, national banks, regional banks, multilateral banks, and adding banks such as the BEM, they want to start having projects with collaterals offered by the federal government, and we're trying to have conversations about the regional integration. I believe this is the first step. We should be able and we should learn how to work together. So private investments, these banks should chat with one another. Panels such as this one are very important because we're going to generate a lot of conversations, a lot of networking, and this is my short answer. What about you guys? What would you like to add? I only have two very brief remarks. How can CAFI or the CAF, we were considering the case of the BRDE, how is CAFI's approach regarding the development banks, including the Brazilian ones? We don't require a sovereign collateral because sometimes we look at these banks and we see them as great allies that we have. And so we assume the risk, we take the risk, and more than that, for the subnational development banks, we have an interest rate that is called almost a sovereign interest rate. It's closer to the sovereign interest rate, but it's not sovereign. There is a small premium. And this reduces the deadlines and everything. Another topic, and there is a very interesting experience. How can we reach the municipalities that have less than 100,000 inhabitants due to a a norm from the Treasury Department? They cannot deal with international banks. We have been doing this in a great way with the BRDE, with the BMDGE, and so we have a negotiation with them so that they can reach the municipalities, so that they can carry out operations that many times if you're looking from far away, it's a small transaction. It's only $5 million, but for that small municipality, it can be, represent a bridge. It can represent the dredging of a river, or for that municipality that only has 30,000 inhabitants, maybe that's crucial. So we have been encouraging this. It is a hybrid modality. It's not a sovereign operation, but we do this as partners, and the results that we have, they are really, really nice. Regarding your question, we do not have to reinvent the wheel. The issue that the secretary mentioned, coordination, is essential. Considering that we are talking about an agenda that requires a lot of money, there is no choice. You have to count on the private sector. There is no other choice. You cannot cry, complain, pull out your hair. So the annual funds and loans done in Latin America is around $20 billion dollars a year. It's almost nothing. $20 billion a year. What do you have to do? You have to create an arsenal of financial instruments, innovation instruments, technology, so that you can create the possibilities for the private sector to enter this. Is the private sector interested? So. But if you create the conditions, legal safety, legal security, combined with instruments that diminish their risk, maybe you can have areas that are interesting for both of them. Social interesting areas and interesting for the private sector. Nowadays, we have an agenda on the negotiation table, which is the climate transition agenda that combines a lot with the SDGs agenda that we mentioned, that has been creating a huge opportunity, a business opportunity, that are profitable, and at the same time they do good. So there is global liquidity because of geopolitical issues. A lot of money has been redirected to other regions. Latin America is extremely privileged when it comes to this. You have Russia, you have China, other countries from the Middle East that are not receiving international funds, to a region that has become a natural target for these funds, as long as some conditions are respected and they are negotiated. And that's our job. Via smart financial instruments, via smart agendas, well-designed projects with a good vision, there is a great probability of attracting good money and a lot of money with longer deadlines that have interesting and reasonable interest rates. And in the end, the result is doing good, and everybody wants that. That's the main pathway ahead. Mobilizing resources, attracting resources, from where these resources are available. And then we have the private sector, without forgetting the philanthropic funds, the sovereign funds, okay? And they are essential partners in our dialogue. Thank you very much.
There was a negative sign that we've been over time. I thank you very much for your participation. And thank you for this dialogue. And thank you for the opportunity on the future and the present, and to get to know a little bit more in terms of sustainable development. Thank you very much.